Welcome, Dr. Epic here. And what we're going to discuss today is what kind of country you actually want to live in. What kind of leader is best for America? What kind of president do you actually want? And along the way, we're going to witness a horrific industrial fire. We're going to shoot at a bulletproof moose. We're going to watch a fat man dance with a sad elephant. And finally see the rising power of American women. We're going to follow that outline right up above my head, so put it in your notes to serve as a framework for the information that's about to follow, as we talk about what actually makes a good leader, what actually makes a good president. And we know what kind of president we actually want because we make them up on television and in the movies. We want presidents that are firm, rational, and moral, like Martin Sheen up there in the upper left. We want presidents that are calm and leaderly and visionary, like Morgan Freeman. We want presidents who are kick-ass and will shoot aliens out of the sky, like that guy. We know what we want in a fictional president. We want presidents that are moral, rational, intelligent, calm, can fly fighter airplanes. That's the kind of president we want. But the problem is that we don't live in a fictional America. We live in a real America. We live in a real country. And we have real men that we elect to be the real president. We don't have fake actors on a sound set pretending to be president. Now here, what we have here are generally what are considered to be the two greatest presidents of the last 100 years of American history. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, old FDR right up above me, and Ronald Reagan over there on the left. And we can tell that these are like the greatest presidents of the last 100 years because presidents keep saying they want to be like these guys. Pretty much every Democratic president since FDR, once he's elected, has said, I'm going to be the next FDR. You know, John F. Kennedy said it, LBJ said it, Joe Biden said it. And we see the same thing with Republican presidents. Every Republican president since Ronald Reagan gets elected and says, I'm going to be the next Ronald Reagan. Both George Bushes did it, Donald Trump did it, and Bill Clinton did it, even though he's a Democrat. So what made these men truly great presidents? Was it their commitment to a noble vision of America? Well, yeah, they both had that. I mean, FDR had this vision of an America where the government sinks deep into all aspects of American life. It helps out the downtrodden. It saves the country from the Great Depression. It organizes everyone to go, destroy Nazi Germany. And Ronald Reagan had a vision of a free America where the government doesn't interfere in the everyday lives of citizens. An America of freedom and liberty and prosperity that's going to tear apart the repressive, evil Soviet empire. And he did. So it's two very different visions. Was it their execution of the will of the people? That these presidents were elected and they said, we know what the people want and we are going to execute their plans. Well, they both did that too. The people wanted to be saved from the Great Depression. That's what FDR did. They wanted to be kept out of World War II. That's what FDR did. And when war became inevitable, they wanted a calm leader that would utterly and completely destroy their enemies. That's what FDR did. That's what Reagan did. People wanted the government out of their lives, and he provided it. People wanted economic prosperity after the 1970s. Reagan delivered it to them. People wanted the destruction of the Soviet Union, and Reagan delivered it. Was it their empathy for the downtrodden? Well, both of these guys had that as well. FDR created huge new government programs to help people that were unemployed, to help people that had been forced out of work. He created all of these jobs, using governmental power during the New Deal. Reagan did the complete opposite. He said, we're going to pull government out of the private sector and let the economy explode. And we're going to help the downtrodden by giving them the opportunity to earn their own wages. Was it the will to make this country great? Both of these men had that as well. FDR saves America from the Great Depression and he leads America through the horrors of World War II. Ronald Reagan saved America from the stagflation of the 1970s and increased military spending and basically spent the Soviet Union into oblivion. both of them making the country a much better place than what it was before they found it. But the problem in comparing, FDR to Ronald Reagan is that these men lived in very, very different times. FDR was elected in 1932, which is very, very different from Ronald Reagan's election in 1980. These are very different Americas that they led. And, it's very hard to compare these two men and, what exactly constituted their style, why one is a great leader or better than the other. But we have an opportunity in the early 20th century to actually do that, to compare two very different presidents who lived at almost the exact same time. That is Woodrow Wilson and Calvin Coolidge. And this is what we're going to do. The battle of the alliterative presidents. Because these men had very, very different visions of what the country wanted to be. They had very, very different opinions of what leadership was. They had very different ideas about what the government was supposed to do. Woodrow Wilson was an activist president and wanted an activist government. Calvin Coolidge was a caretaker president and just wanted to take care of the government. So what we're going to do here is you are going to compare the leadership styles of Woodrow Wilson and Calvin Coolidge, eventually arriving at the conclusion of which one was the better president, which one was the better American leader. Now, the thing here is that I don't really want to impose on you like what actually constitutes a great leader. I don't want to impose my ideas of what constitutes a good or a great president on you. I want you to kind of cogitate that on your own. All I'm going to do is fall back on, the old Boy Scout analogy. I'm an old Boy Scout, in that every Boy Scout was taught to leave the campsite better than what it was when you found it. And so that is really the ultimate test of what a good president is. Do they leave the country better off than what it was when they found it? Are they good Boy Scouts? Because we're building an answer to a bigger question. We're building an answer to that question there on the left. Wilson versus Coolidge, or what kind of America do you want? Evaluate the presidencies of Woodrow Wilson and Calvin Coolidge, their respective ideologies, their successes, and their failures in the early 20th century. And from a modern perspective, from your perspective, who was the better president? Now, why does this matter? Why are we going to spend so much time on Calvin Coolidge and Woodrow Wilson? And it comes down to the party systems. It comes down to modern political ideologies. Because for better or worse, all of American political history has been traditionally organized into party systems. And what the party systems are is the factional struggle between two dominant political parties. America has always had a two-party system, for better or for worse. We've always had it going all the way back to George Washington. The only serious third-party attempts were back in the Gilded Age with the populists of the 1880s, or with Teddy Roosevelt's progressives in the very weird election of 1912, which we're going to talk about in just a tick. So all of American history is basically the factional struggle between two political parties, with one of the two being dominant during a different party system. So here it is. All of American political history can be boiled down into 6 party systems. You have the first party system, which is Alexander Hamilton's Federalists versus Thomas Jefferson's Democratic Republicans, with Jefferson ultimately winning the first party system. This is followed by the second party system, Andrew Jackson's Democrats versus Henry Clay's Whigs. And now the second party system disintegrates in the 1850s in the events that lead up to the Civil War. And then coming out of the Civil War, you have the third party system, the Bourbon Democrats in the South versus the federal Republicans up in the North. And clearly the Republicans are the dominant political party during the third party system. What we're going to talk about here is the fourth party system, the populist Democrats versus the capitalist Republicans. We're going to look at that in great detail because it is in the fourth party system that the modern political ideologies are formed for the next 100 years. Now, the fourth party system disintegrates in the Great Depression, and that's succeeded by the fifth party system, which is the New Deal Democrats of FDR versus the country club Republicans. And then in that era, the Democrats are the dominant political party. That is followed in the 1980s by the sixth party system, which is the liberal Democrats versus the conservative Republicans. And arguably, it is in the Great Recession of the 2010s that the sixth party system starts to fall apart. And some people argue that we are on the verge of a seventh party system. But I guess we'll see. What we are going to talk about, the fourth party system. The fourth party system. The populist Democrats versus the capitalist Republicans. Woodrow Wilson versus Calvin Coolidge. Because it is the fourth party system that sets the ideological divide in American politics for the next century. It is this general approach to the role of the government in American society. It's not just like what kind of America do you want, but almost like what kind of government do you want? Now, Woodrow Wilson, right up above me, Woodrow Wilson was the first promoter of a very proactive government, an activist government, and he was an activist president. While Calvin Coolidge staunchly defended a much calmer caretaker government, and Coolidge is the caretaker president. So, like, what do these terms mean? Activists and caretakers. And it comes down to this. Now, an activist government seeks to address what it identifies as the existing problems in American society. It's an activist government. So the government sees a problem and then actively attempts to address the problem through federal action. An activist government seeks to prevent problems from happening in the first place. So the role of the government in an activist government is to actively engage in widespread social engineering. I want change, and the federal government's going to deliver that change. It is to improve the American nation, to actively make it a better, more just, more fair place to live in. It's an activist government. Caretaker government is quite different. A caretaker government sees itself as the inheritor of a system that already works pretty well. We've got a garden, and our garden grows wonderful things. We've got an assembly line, and it produces a lot of really nice cars or whatever. So the job of a caretaker government is just to take care of the nation as it already exists and to deal with problems as they arise one at a time. If problems arise, they can be identified and addressed with by the application of federal action. It is the role of the government to simply be a caretaker of the American nation, to do as little as possible, to let it just grow as it will, and then save its strengths for the problems, for the really big problems as they arise. It's not to radically re-engineer the garden as it currently exists, but to make sure that the tomatoes stay by the tomato plants and the vegetables stay in the vegetable patch and the roses stay over there, and that everything is just kind of taken care of, not to actively engage in engineering, this garden or this assembly line of an American nation. Now, a good parable that will determine which of these two things you favor can be seen in the parable of Chesterton's fence. Okay, I'm now going to tell you the parable of Chesterton's fence. Now, G.K. Chesterton, that's him up there. He was a political writer during this period, and he came up with this parable. And it will basically say whether you are more activist or more caretaker in your overall political leanings. And the parable is this. Okay, you and a large group of people are traveling across the country. You might have horses or wagons or cars. Doesn't matter. There's you and the whole lot of you. And you come across a fence running parallel to your direction of travel. Okay, now what do you do about the fence? Now, an activist says, this fence is in our way. It's in the middle of nowhere. Let's just tear down the fence and just keep going. I can't see any reason why this fence is here. We're going to actively remove the fence and continue on our path of journey. That's an activist. Now, a caretaker is going to say the complete opposite. A caretaker is going to say, whoa. Obviously, somebody built this fence, all right? I mean, it runs right this way. So the fence is here for some reason, even though we might not know what this reason is. So instead of actively demolishing this fence, what we're going to do is just kind of travel along the fence and look for a gate, maybe look for a way we can climb over, look for whoever built the fence, but we're not going to tear down the fence because obviously somebody built it. All right. Now, think about this parable. Are you in the former category where you want to actively demolish the fence and just continue your direction of travel, continue your progress? Or are you a caretaker in which you're going to stop your progress until you can figure out what this fence is for, or until you can find an opening to go around it or over it? Cogitate on that for just a tick, because that is pretty much going to determine where your sympathies lie when you begin to build an answer to that question right there. Wilson versus Coolidge, or what kind of America do you want? And we're going to start with a horrific industrial fire, probably the most infamous horrific industrial fire of them all. The Triangle Shirtwaist Fire of 1911. A truly horrible tragedy in American history. Okay, what is a shirtwaist? A shirtwaist is a women's blouse. It looks exactly like that. Okay, so in 1911, you have the Triangle Shirtwaist Company operated a garment factory in the upper 3 floors of the Ash Building in Manhattan, in downtown New York City. They employed about 500 workers, almost entirely young women, almost entirely immigrant Jewish young women, to cut and sew shirtwaists for consumption. They're making ready-made clothes. The factory was highly cramped within these 3 floors. The factory floor was often strewn with spare threads, cut bits of cloth, little tangles of cloth, tangles of wire. Some of it would get soaked in oil from all the machines. So it is really not a safe or comfortable place to work. It's pretty much a sweatshop. To prevent theft, the factory owners, after all the workers showed up, would lock the doors. All right. So to prevent theft, the factory owners would then lock the doors during work hours. And the work hours lasted from 5 in the morning to 7 in the evening. So, I mean, your work day was 14 hours long, and you were locked into this building the entire time. Now, the workers had gone on strike in 1909, 2 years earlier, and they had asked for safety improvements and better wages and a reduction of hours. And they didn't get much of that. They got slightly better wages, but importantly, they didn't get any improvements in safety. Somewhere between 4:30 and 5 p.m. on March 25th, a fire starts in the 8th floor, besides a large pile of cuttings and fabric scraps. No one knows what started the fire. It might have been a lit cigarette. It could have been a faulty electrical cable. It could have been anything, but it doesn't matter because the fire rapidly races across the floor, spreading from scraps of cloth to scraps of cloth, catching light on the oil of the machines, and the fire races through the 8th floor, consuming all these piles of cloth piled up around the factory. The women panicked. They flee upwards. They go to the door, but the doors are locked. So they flee from the 8th floor to the 9th floor, only to find that the fire is following them up. And eventually they end up on the 10th floor, with the 8th and 9th floor just completely consumed in fire. There's only a single window that they can open. They break it out. They get onto a fire escape, but the fire escape was too small. It had been constructed with inferior materials, and after about 100 or so people get onto this fire escape, literally the entire thing bends and just falls away from the building. And the women are now trapped on the 10th floor of the Ash Building, and the fire is about to reach them. Firefighters arrive to find the building completely consumed. Now, the ladders and the hoses could only reach 7 stories up. They couldn't reach the women on the 10th floor. The women on the 10th floor began to gather equipment and boards and begin to smash, and they smashed open the windows. But there were no fire escapes. The doors were locked. The fire is now on the 10th floor. The women began to jump from the windows. And by this time, a huge crowd had gathered below, staring up at this conflagration on the top of the building. And in front of hundreds of horrified New Yorkers, these young women began to jump from the 10th floor, impacting the sidewalk one by one. All right. Everyone is completely horrified. Everyone is completely helpless. Even as the building burned, the one hero of the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, Joseph Zito, an Italian immigrant, continues to operate his elevator during the fire. Back in those days, elevators weren't automatic. You didn't push a button and it took you to the floor. You had an elevator operator, and the elevator basically just had a lever that was like up, stop, and down. And Joseph Zito, the entire time the building was burning, was moving his elevator up and down the elevator shaft. And to get to the 10th floor, he had to pass through the burning 8th and 9th floor. And he would open his elevator on the 10th floor, get in about a dozen, 15 women, go down to the floor, open it, shove them out, and go back up again. Every time traveling through the fire, pushing his elevator through the fire. He made about a dozen trips. He saved most of the women that were there until the fire actually twisted the runners of the elevator. And he was going up his last time, and it was becoming increasingly hard to get the elevator up the shaft. And, suddenly the whole elevator just shakes. Boom, it shakes. And then he tries to get it to go a little bit further up. And then suddenly there's another bang, on the top of his elevator. And he can't go any farther. The elevator is getting stuck, and he doesn't want to get stuck in the middle of the fire. And then there's bang. There's another huge sound from the top of the elevator. And he eventually has to go back because he can't get through the fire. And as the elevator is descending down through the building, every 5 or 10 seconds, the entire elevator just bang. There's a huge shock. And when he gets to the ground floor, he realizes it's women jumping down the elevator shaft to escape the fire and impacting on the top of his elevator. It's utterly and completely horrifying. 146 people die, almost entirely young women. Some burned so badly that they could not be distinguished from the charred mannequins of the garment factory. The factory owners, who had locked the door and who had survived the fire, were acquitted of any crime, and they were only fined $11,000 because nothing they did was illegal in 1911. Nothing they did was illegal, even though, their actions killed 146 young women and girls. The entire city of New York is completely horrified. And the importance of the Triangle Fire is that it largely ends this debate about unregulated capitalism. The public horror of the Triangle Fire shocked the public. They literally watched women killing themselves or be burned alive. And they demanded that the government intervene in factory conditions and labor relations. By 1914, over 36 new laws were passed, regulating safety conditions, fire prevention, working hours. After the Triangle Fire, and right up above me, there's one of the victims of the Triangle Fire, Tilly Cooper Schmidt, aged 17. She was 17 years old when she died in the Triangle Fire. Horrifying. After the Triangle Fire, no one in America wants to return to the old freewheeling, high-profit, high-risk days of the Gilded Age. Because to take that high-profit, high-risk Gilded Age economy, you're going to have a lot of funerals. So the argument changes. Not whether the government should intervene in the economy, but what form government intervention should take. Should it be the caretakers of Calvin Coolidge and the Republicans, or the activists of Woodrow Wilson and the Democrats? Now, even to this day, people remember the Triangle Fire. The building is still there. You can travel to New York City. You can go to 23rd, 29th Washington Place. There is, they've renamed the building because it was so infamous, the Brown Building. And the top 3 floors of that building is where the Triangle Shirtwaist factory was. Man, that place has got to be like crazy haunted. Just crazy haunted. And every year, people in New York get together to commemorate this horrible tragedy and write the names of these poor women on the sidewalk, close to where they died. So people remember the Triangle Fire 110 years later. And this is the debate over the Triangle Fire. And the tragedy of the Triangle Fire casts a shadow on what is going to be one of the strangest elections in American history. the election of 1912 and what form of government intervention is the people are going to support. You know, the activism of the Democrats or the caretakerism, is that a word? The caretakerism of the Republicans. And one of the reasons that the election of 1912 is so strange aren't two candidates. There are four candidates. William Taft, the Republican, Woodrow Wilson, the Democrat, Teddy Roosevelt, the progressive, and Eugene Debs, the socialist. Now, all of this mess gets started, of course, with Teddy Roosevelt. And it starts with a clash between Theodore Roosevelt and his old vice president, William Howard Taft. Roosevelt, of course, was president between 1901 and 1908, and he actually selected Taft as his vice president and his successor. So Roosevelt retires from politics. He goes to Africa to hunt big game, write books about the strenuous life. So Roosevelt hands Taft, there's Roosevelt and there's Taft. So Roosevelt hands Taft the presidency in 1908 with the understanding that Taft is going to continue to expand Roosevelt's old square deal. And Taft is going to be an extension of Theodore Roosevelt's presidency. But that's not what Taft wants to do. Taft is very much his own man. Taft straight up disagrees. Taft viewed Roosevelt's square deal as kind of a high watermark, something that is accomplished, but it's something that can be relaxed. William Taft doesn't want to be a second Teddy Roosevelt. What he really wants to be is another William McKinley. So he kind of goes back to being one of these old kind of traditional stalwart 19th century Republicans. Theodore Roosevelt is outraged. He handed his legacy to this man to watch this man basically just leave it on the sidewalk. And Roosevelt becomes increasingly a harsh critic of his own former vice president. And these attacks get really nasty. Teddy Roosevelt starts to call William Taft a fathead, starts to call him a puzzlewit, says he has a 3 guinea pig brain, makes fun of his weight. Taft is the fattest president. Taft doesn't take this lying down. He calls Roosevelt a dangerous egotist and a demagogue who is taking back what he once freely gave. And then Theodore Roosevelt attempts to do something unheard of in American politics. He attempts to unseat his own successor. Theodore Roosevelt announces he will run for the presidency on the Republican ticket in 1912. And he was running against his own vice president. So it's two former Republican presidents facing off against each other. And we can see that there in the little cartoon. There is Roosevelt handing Bill, that's William Taft, the nomination to be the Republican president. And then in 1912, the cartoon Teddy Roosevelt is sticking a cartoon pistol in cartoon William Taft's face, telling him to give it back. And for the most part, the Republican voters voted for Theodore Roosevelt. Theodore Roosevelt wins the Republican vote during the Republican primaries. But William Taft is president. And because William Taft is president, he's the head of the Republican Party. So he uses the mechanics within the Republican Party to not only deny the nomination to Teddy Roosevelt, but he kicks him out of the Republican Party. And Taft simply nominates himself as the Republican nominee for president. And hence we have this absolutely great cartoon right here of William Taft, the fat man, dancing with a sad elephant. See, they're dancing together. He's dancing with the elephant, but the elephant pines for her true love. She really wants to dance with Theodore Roosevelt. Oh, sad elephant. Theodore Roosevelt overwhelmingly won the primary vote among Republicans. But again, William Taft used the mechanics of the party to kick Roosevelt off the ticket. Roosevelt says, I'm not going to take this lying down. If I get kicked out of the Republican Party, I'm just going to make my own party. And he does. Undaunted, Theodore Roosevelt creates his own political party, and he calls it the Progressive Party. And if the symbol of the Democrats is a donkey and the symbol of the Republicans is an elephant, Theodore Roosevelt chooses the bull moose to be the symbol of the Progressive Party. So a lot of people just start calling this the Bull Moose Party. He then campaigns against his own successor. Theodore Roosevelt campaigns against the Republican Party. And he's at a speech when he is shot. All right, on October 14th, just before a big speech in Milwaukee, a man named John Schrank walks up before Roosevelt gives a speech and bang, shoots Roosevelt in the chest. Now, Schrank was insane. I mean, he was clearly nuts. He thought he had been visited by the ghost of William McKinley that told him no president should have a third term. So John Schrank is absolutely crazy. He shoots Theodore Roosevelt. The bullet goes into his chest, but is largely slowed down by Roosevelt's thick speech and his eyeglass case. And that's Roosevelt's speech and eyeglass case right up above me. And Roosevelt mounts the podium and he starts giving his speech, and everyone who was there had heard the gunshot. And they're like, what's going on? Were you shot? Were you shot? Oh, did he miss you? And Teddy Roosevelt goes, well, yes, there was a shot. And no, he didn't miss me at all. And Theodore Roosevelt then opens his own shirt and pulls it open to show the bleeding bullet hole in his own chest. And Theodore Roosevelt says, yes, the assassin did hit me, but a bullet can't stop a bull moose. He then proceeds to give the entire speech, bleeding from the bullet hole the entire time. That's Theodore Roosevelt for you. Now, he didn't technically say a bullet can't stop a bull moose, but that's the legend. I like the legend better. Seeing all this chaos among the Republicans, the Democrats see their chance to get a Democratic president for the first time since Grover Cleveland. And the Democrats select a popular reform-minded candidate in Woodrow Wilson, right up above me. Woodrow Wilson is the governor of New Jersey. He's the former university professor from Princeton. Now, Wilson was from Virginia, a southern state, and was studied. He was highly educated. He had a doctorate, he had a PhD. And as the governor of New Jersey, Woodrow Wilson had embraced the old populist model. He really saw himself as the successor to William Jennings Bryan. And this is how he was portrayed in the cartoons of the day. He was a university professor, so they liked drawing him as this kind of skinny, nerdish school marm, schooling people on what they should do. But also, the socialists see it as their chance as well, with all of this infighting between the Republicans and the Democrats. So also in the election of 1912, a figure emerges from the radical fights of the old labor movement. After Samuel Gompers kicked all the radicals out of the American Federation of Labor, they all basically went into politics. They formed the Socialist Party, and they found a leader in Eugene Debs, the old leader from the Pullman strike, back in the 1890s. So they formed the Socialist Party in 1901, and Eugene Debs is calling for a radical reimagining of American society. He's calling for widespread confiscation of wealth and industry. He's calling for racial equality. He's calling for the elimination of the upper classes. Debs crisscrosses the nation, giving these fiery speeches against capitalism, giving these fiery speeches in favor of the working class of America. And you can see these quotes with him right there. The class which has the power to rob upon a large scale also has the power to control the government and legalize their robbery. Not exactly wrong, Eugene Debs. Oh, there you go. There's another quote right up above me. The issue is socialism versus capitalism. I am for socialism because I am for humanity. We have been cursed with the reign of gold long enough. Money constitutes no proper basis of civilization. The time has come to regenerate society, and we are on the eve of universal change. But there's another huge issue overshadowing the election of 1912, which is the rising power of women. Women in 1912 did not have the vote. And in this new industrial society, they saw no reason why they should not have the power of the vote. They are pressuring politicians. They are pressuring the government to give women the right to vote. There we have in the cartoon right up above me, a woman, the torch in one hand, demanding suffrage, demanding the right to vote. Women tearing off the shackles, tearing off the ropes that bind her, that say politics is no place for women. And the politician who really courts this female support, who really courts women's support, is Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson especially runs promising to create a new constitutional amendment to extend the franchise to women. Many women come out to support Woodrow Wilson, even though they cannot actually vote for him. And this is the situation leading up to Election Day 1912. 4 separate candidates. Theodore Roosevelt and his bull moose. Taft dancing with that sad elephant. They gave Eugene Debs a goat. I don't know why they gave him a goat. Eugene Debs and the goat of socialism. And a skinny Woodrow Wilson, his nose buried in a book. The university professor running on the Democratic ticket. There they are, courting Miss Columbia, courting America. There's the nebbish, skinny, nerdy Woodrow Wilson, the big boy William Taft, and then everybody's favorite Theodore Roosevelt. That's how they're acting, all smiles and confidence, but everyone was on the edge of their seat because nobody knew who was going to be president. Election Day 1912. People line up to vote, and the results start to come in. Woodrow Wilson has been elected president. It is a massive electoral landslide as he wins states all the way from Oregon to Texas to Florida to Maine. It seems a sea of Democratic pink. But if you look at the actual popular vote, you'll see that the only reason Woodrow Wilson won so many states is because Taft and Roosevelt split the Republican vote between them. Woodrow Wilson didn't even break 50% of the vote. And in fact, if you add up Roosevelt and Taft, they exceed Wilson's vote. And, weird old Theodore Roosevelt becomes the only third-party candidate in American history to win 6 states and not be a member of any major political party. Woodrow Wilson takes the oath of office on March 4th, 1913. And we'll get into the activist presidency of Woodrow Wilson next time. And I will see you there.